never forget what Jesus said when he said, "You have heard it said, but I say." I am reframing the tradition for the moment. I am reframing it. When Jesus preached his initial sermon in Luke 4, when he shared with them, there were many widows in Israel, but God healed this widow of Zarephath. Many lepers in Israel, but naming the Syrian. He is saying there what Thurman is arguing. He's arguing, and as you said, Pastor Hilby, for the universality of the love of God, that God is not owned by Jewish people. God is not owned by evangelicals. God is not owned by progressives. That God's spirit is not able to be domesticated. And those people were murderous. They sought to kill Jesus. We don't frame the fact that from the time Jesus is born, he's having to dodge murder. He's dodging those who would quench what God is trying to do. Mary could have said no. That's one possibility of death. When Herod comes after him, that's another possibility of death. He goes back and preaches, another possibility of death. Gospel of John, after he raises Lazarus, they say, we got to kill this guy because, listen to this, and you all have been intimating it, the power of empire is the power of death. The only tool they hang over our heads is the power of death. If we believe that death has no dominion over us, or if we believe that giving our lives in the service of God does not end life, but in some ways resurrects God's power, then we cannot be controlled or owned or co-opted. Yeah. And so what Thurman, I feel, is arguing is, in this time, because of where the Spirit is going, I must reinterpret Jesus. Now, the video clip, and hopefully Trey will share it with you, it's 4 or 5 minutes. If you've never seen Thurman, heard his voice, he talks about religious experience as a contagion, as something that is caught. And here's a dilemma that we're caught in. We've got dogma, which is helpful, and we've got theology, which is helpful. And I don't want to denigrate the tradition that we have received, but the tradition we can have really, you can have the heresy of orthodoxy, or you can have making God out of the dogma and traditions that are to point us to God, but are not God themselves. And so I feel like we are not doing our work if we are not interpreting Jesus for the moment in the soils where we have been planted, so that, as Melanie mentioned, people can connect. People can connect with him. So let me move here, and I'm going to stop and need to hear from you. So we're in 2020, and I think this is what Thurman would push us to do. He pushed King for interpretation for the moment, right? King being one of his master students. You all have heard the anecdote that King traveled with this book with him. He always had it. 2020, we live now when the white supremacist, intellectual, political hegemony is fragile, it's cracking. People are asking questions now that they never asked. Is this Columbus story true? Is this Jefferson stuff true? Is this American stuff true? And it is rocking the foundations of this nation, because the narratives that we have been given, they have defined us. Nothing makes people more murderous than when you change the story of their God. That's what it tells us. When you change the story of who God is, people become murderous. Our homicidal impulses rise like yeast. Yeah. That's one major shift that we've got. The second is the looming end of the American empire. You can't see that the American empire is on its last leg, you're blind. Look at where the politics are. You can do no legislating. You will not even pass a bill to help people who are dying physically and economically of a pandemic. You deny science. You pick a fight with China that you cannot win. The empire is declining, everybody sees it. We may not name it differently, but we see it, and that requires a different interpretation. The geopolitical posturing between the powers and a drifting, not only in the United States, but in other places toward authoritarianism, fascism, totalitarianism. And even we know that the rhetoric of democracy has been used to do undemocratic things, but now they won't even use the rhetoric to soften what they're doing. They're just doing it, which lets you know we're in a new era. And so what we're called to do with 12 minutes left, how will we have the courage to lean and live in the Spirit as Thurman did, so that we might hear a fresh wind from God, a fresh voice, fresh interpretation? And I'll give you two things and I'll stop. I preached the other day, I had always read past, think about the lenses that we get. We get lenses to read past God being on the underside, God as laborer. So Genesis 2, and the Lord God planted a garden. I talked about God as laborer, God with dirt under God's fingernails, God being not the owner of Home Depot, but the men who gather at Home Depot at 5 o'clock in the morning looking for work, and what it means to speak of God in that way. Looking for, as you said, Brother Hilby, that there's so much stuff there in the story that we've been given, but the way that we have been taught to read it blinds us to its riches. And so what Thurman offers, I believe, are fresh lenses that in many places are as fresh in 2020 as they were in 1949, but there are some lenses of Thurman that will not work today. And this is the work that the Spirit calls us to. And I'll stop there.